Welcome to part 2 of What the Movie Burlesque Can Teach Us About Urban Planning. Brought to you is part of the Untitled Planning's Pop Culture Club. In the first part, we gave an introduction to the movie Burlesque and chatted all about air rights and whether the movie's description of them was accurate or not, amongst many other things. So make sure to give that a watch for further context. At the end of the last video, we had just started talking about creative cities, creative class theory, and the night economy. So let's pick up where we left off and see what insights the movie Burlesque can spark around this topic.
I want to hear more about the cultural economy and sort of the night economy and the way that this film touches on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the funny part is like this movie, I don't know, just feel, and I think that's the fun part of this exercise because we watch a movie and we're like, okay, first thing air rights. But then, as you and I were talking about the movie more, we're like, oh, wait, there's so much more to unpack here, right? You can talk about what you just touched on, like the cultural economy. So like talking or like the creative economy. So there's this idea, if you haven't heard of it yet, the idea of like creative cities. And funnily enough, I'm going to talk about Toronto because that's ultimately where we are. But if you didn't know, the city of Toronto is actually classified by UNESCO as a creative city of media arts. And I think that just kind of speaks to the type of, so I guess this creative city kind of like label helps cities to kind of like classify or like also like I guess commodify in a different way, but also recognize some of the different like artists and artisanry and like different like kind of skill sets that each different cities are like kind of focused on. So turns out Toronto's all about media arts, which makes sense. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I didn't know there was like an official like designation for that.
Yeah. There's a
Makes,
whole network too.
yeah, it makes sense though, because like so much is like filmed here and
yeah, it's funny. Funnily enough, if you look at so every other year, Venice has like a biennale, and there's specifically the Biennale of Architecture. So like it alternates. It's between the Biennale of like art and then architecture. But anyway, so a few biennales ago, okay, to explain the whole thing of like biennales and how that works, but basically, what happens is that like all the countries around the world, they have like a what they call like a pavilion, which is like a space that's devoted to showcasing their like best architecture or best proposed project of architecture that relates to whatever theme has been curated to be showcased for the Venice Biennale. And then so Canada is one of those countries that has like a pavilion in Venice where we showcase our best architecture every 2 years at these different occasions. And anyway, but one of the exhibitions that was picked was called Imposter Cities. And basically the whole like premise of it was that like how the architecture in Canada, like Canadian cities are being used to represent specifically like American cities, but also like other cities.
yeah,
Yeah, in movies. Yeah. Like Toronto is often pretends
New
like
York.
there is often New York ultimately.
Yeah,
And it's funny because like you can watch the movie and then every so often you'll like spot you'll see like the
the
CN
CN Tower
Tower.
in the back.
I think it just speaks to like the fact that I know some of the design in our cities are so like interchangeable in many ways that like you it does feel like New York, but like on a Canadian budget, I suppose, and that's how
Yeah, for
that's how
real.
filmmakers literally see us, which is kind of funny. But yeah, no, but that ultimately yeah, so Toronto is like a media art city, but then other cities also have their own designations as well. And then this goes into like more of like there's like broader debates about like when you talk about creativeness, what are you defining as creative? What does that actually mean, and who's actually the people who are doing creativity? And there's a whole theory which we've talked about at length, me and I at least in some of our classes, talking about economic development, about like the creative class. I don't know if you want to chat, if you want to introduce it, or you want me to go ahead and do it, Mia?
You go ahead.
Okay.
I'll add anything if I need to.
Okay, yeah, you catch me if I miss anything. But yeah, basically this idea, so the idea of the creative class is basically this theory on how cities can like capitalize on like the creative economy and ultimately the commodification of creativity for economic development. So the theory kind of centers around the idea that that creative industries and creative workers, and so by creative workers, it's like people in arts, people in entertainment. It also kind of includes, I think they kind of include tech too as well. Like a mixture of different things where people are like creating stuff. But anyway, they put them all under this kind of umbrella of like creative workers, of the creative class. And that like when cities like cater to them through like different amenities or whatnot, they help to bring a lot of like investment, and they attract a lot of money ultimately to cities that can help them to boost their overall prosperity. And we can go deeper into the whole theory another day, and the debates around it. But ultimately, one part of the theory is that there's a lot of indices that they've been created that help to like measure, you know, what levels of creativity are being. I feel like I'm saying created so many different times. I'm just saying the word
I think
creative over and over again.
you're doing good though. It's like a good explanation.
Thank you. Okay. Where's it going with this? Let me start this again. Okay. Okay, so the theory is saying that essentially that there are creative industries, so like arts, it could be, and that could be like public art, that could be like more like private forms of art, it could be like music, and another type of like creative industry, like dance, entertainment, all these different industries, and then ultimately the workers, so the people, the artists, the creatives that do these that like contribute to these different industries, we lump them all under the creative class. And then ultimately the theory is saying that if you as a city are to cater to their needs, you're able to attract additional investment because these folks, through the byproduct of the work that they do, ultimately also attract other people to come to these cities and create more opportunities for like money to circulate in a city, ultimately leading to the overall prosperity of the city. So that's kind of like the bare bones explanation of it. And then there's a bunch of like indices that are being used to like measure like different aspects of creativity and what can be done and where certain, so to speak, certain investments should go to. But ultimately it's about creating to these folks, creating amenities that support these folks. But that's good in some ways. But ultimately there's also a lot of pushback on this theory because it's not just when it comes to you know, sorry, there's a lot of pushback around this theory because it's not just one particular class that helps a city to grow. And when you're just like catering to one specific group of people, it fails to consider like the other, let's say like quote unquote uncreative workers. So you're thinking about like the taxi drivers that need to get people to and from different places. You're thinking about like, you know, the bus drivers that also get people to, like the restaurant workers that have to stay up late to support the people who are going to all these different creative, quote unquote creative jobs or consuming these different creative products, whether it's like a concert or I don't know, some sort of like art show or an art gallery opening, all these different things that they're referring to. Like it's a whole ecosystem that needs to be supported. So you can't just, let's say, funnel all your money into one particular subset of people and then forget the other group, because the result is a number of different like adverse effects, like gentrification, a number of different things. Basically, a lot of the critiques are that this is like a band-aid solution to addressing these issues. And
And
so, yeah, go ahead.
I
Okay.
was gonna, and like you said earlier, I feel like a lot of times it ends up focused on attracting like tech workers,
Yeah.
and then all of the cities, all of the other people working in the creative class who like actually make, do put on events and like create art are like pushed out of the city because of rising rents.
Yeah, and inequality. But yeah, this displacement, you know, often in the end, also I guess annoying part of this is that a lot of the displacement affects like BIPOC communities ultimately. So I had found actually an article that I think explains it a lot better than we can in a short amount of time. And one of the key excerpts from this I wanted to highlight is that it says here, the political questions around creative class planning should be challenged because they have helped to accelerate displacement of poor communities around the country and shift city government priorities away from poverty alleviation to amenity development. Yeah. So
And I
this
think
is
Toronto's
yeah.
like really all in on that.
Yeah. Toronto and a number of other cities went in all in on it. with the promise or the on the premise that like, you know, if we had just one more coffee shop, like just one more sculpture, we might be able to turn this ship around. Only, but they're like still waiting ultimately to see that ship turn. Like the ship has like literally sailed, and we're in all kinds of other messes. Like speaking from the Toronto's perspective specifically, but anyway.
Yeah, there's so many things to get into on that
Yeah, that's a
for
whole
another
other thing.
episode.
But I thought it was funny. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and show this one website because I typed up creative cities and I was like, okay, let's see what pops up. What are people on about now? and see what comes
Ooh.
up. And I'm like, okay, this website looks really cool. I'm not gonna lie. But anyway, but then I got a little bit upset, honestly. So I was going through, so yeah, the world's most creative cities. And then I was going down, and then okay, so the top 5 cities: Paris, Barcelona, Dublin, London, Tel Aviv. I was like, all right, okay, sure. And then I go through the list, and then what do I see? Or what do I don't see ultimately? First of all, Toronto's
Yeah.
not even on the top 20, which I thought was kind of funny.
I honestly, I don't think it should be.
Yeah, no, yeah, it really shouldn't be, but I just thought it was funny, nevertheless. So Vancouver's ranked higher, then you got Montreal, then you got Toronto.
And they're all Europe and North America,
Literally all Europe and
pretty
okay,
much.
pretty
Plus
much, yeah.
Buenos Aires.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, but mainly, but then when like there's only one, I think in this list when I went through it, there's only one African country. Yeah, Marrakesh is here. But I don't, yeah. And I'm like, that's
Yeah.
messed up. Because you know what? You know what? Another major creative city is the city of Lubumbashi. And it's I think it's this a creative city of like artisanry, something to do with artisanry and like crafts, something like that. I can't remember now. But like if you go on the network and you look it up, it's like it's a thing. And I'm like, that just speaks to also the what I was trying to get at before about when we're talking about creativity, like how are we defining creative, who is creative, but then also like how are they pulling this information? And the answer is I actually know because they put it here. And I'm like, one of them was from Euromonitor. So I was like, no wonder why. And like TripAdvisor. I was like, no wonder why things are so skewed. But I think that just talks to the like that speaks to, I guess, people's debates about this theory where it can be a bit, or like this idea of like just focusing on creativity, or like I think the indices that they're using to evaluate your creativity are or can be kind of honestly kind of superficial, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
they're pulling from Instagram hashtag use to like use in relation to street art. And I get it. Like this is not knocking this company for whatever they've done, but I'm just that this just mirrors like broader debates about like what are we defining as creativity? Who are these creative cities, and who what is valued by a city versus others? Like and what does that mean for how we're living? Like what are the consequences of that on how our cities are run today?
Yeah. Like it's kind of if you're only going to look at these websites, it's going to be a reductive, like it's not going to be a whole holistic view of creativity.
Exactly.
And it's kind of replicating sort of like some like narratives and power imbalances we see about what art is valuable all the time.
Yeah, essentially, like truly. But it's funny enough, if you do like, and you touched on it before, like the city of Toronto really does like put quite a lot of kind of fed into that creative, I guess, city narrative in many ways. And I guess in many ways they're right too, because the arts and cultural sector, according to the Toronto Arts Council study that I've been reading, so the arts and cultural sector actually contributes $11.3 billion annually to Toronto's GDP. Um, and then the statistics show that for every $1 that the city invests in the nonprofit arts sector, it generates $12.46 from other levels of government and the private sector. And not only that, it says that people are 4 times more likely, or like tourists are 4 times more likely to visit Toronto for the culture than for sports. So I don't know how the sports fans feel about
That's so
that.
cool.
But yeah, no, it's a major attractor and it works clearly. Yeah. But I think it's funny because so arts and culture, it encompasses these small like burlesque lounges like the one that's in this movie, but it's also public art, it's theater operators, it's dancers, but it really should also include the army of like restaurant workers and taxi drivers and transit operators that support them and get them to and from all these venues. And then this happens not only during the day, but often like when you go to a concert, it's usually like the dark in the middle of the night. So that also contributes to what is called the night economy. And so the night economy, at least according to the City of Toronto's website, is so the night economy describes the social, cultural, and economic activities that take place between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. in Toronto. So these activities include entertainment such as attending concerts or going out to eat, practical necessities like grocery shopping, and performing actual employment. So a major component of the night economy is a nighttime workforce, including those who help manage life at night, such as hospitality industry workers, bar owners, shift workers, and emergency services professionals. A healthy night economy supports all the needs of its residents at night. And I think it's really interesting because so like this summer in particular was a summer of like honestly like I guess a really like high powered women singer. It's like this summer like Beyonce was on tour, the Renaissance tour like took the world by storm. And then of course on the other end you also have Taylor Swift, who also had her era, or is currently on her Eras tour. And like not only did she just become a billionaire from all the work that she's doing, but it's also meant a huge, I mean, both concerts, both women have like produced like major economic boosts for the like cities that they've been going to. Like I remember when like Taylor Swift announced the tour, and then initially she wasn't coming to Toronto, and then I forget who, but ultimately they got Trudeau to like tweet her and be like, please come. And now she's coming. And guess what they say? I found this article. It says Swiftonomics. When a tsunami of Swifties crashes in Toronto, it will leave an economic boost in its wake. A spin-off effect of up to $700 million is expected when the Eras tour comes to Canada. That's wild.
Yeah, that's so. One of our friends, when this was like first announced, was talking about how, oh, be ready for everyone you know to like reach out to you to be like, can I crash on your couch for the Eras tour?
Exactly. And it's funny because so like going on that same note, I was watching this one video of this some random like girl on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and then she was explaining how she spent $35,000 going to like 8 different Beyonce, like she went 8 times to, or like 4 times or something like that to, or at least multiple times to Beyonce's Renaissance tour performances. And she spent that much. And I was like, okay, first of all, first of all, good for you for having that much like disposable income. Like, good on you, girl. What do you, but then the other thing was like, okay, what are you spending it on other than the ticket? Because I know they were expensive. Like I had a friend that's paid like $1,000, so, but they got like front row, like Beyonce's like literally sweating on him, like
Oh my
tickets
God.
for $1,000. But like, okay, so but how do you go that jump at least, let's say from 35K, from 1K to 35K? And ultimately she's like, she like traveled to different cities, and then obviously you travel to a different city, so you have to get a hotel, and you have to take the taxis or the Ubers to get there. And then she's like, okay, I'm gonna do my nails, and of course if you're going to the Renaissance tour, you got to have your like a Renaissance outfit. And you got to get
Yeah.
your hair done. And it was like this whole like, and I'm like, this is one person 35K. Like imagine if we were all spending 35K per concert, flying into all these different cities. What kind of like economic kind of like wave that would create. And ultimately, yeah, no, there's proof of it. And I think it's funny, talking about the night economy, and where all these like I guess superstars and and concerts and musicians and creative workers kind of fall into it. Is prime example is that it says here, Beyonce is her own transit system. The superstar paid $100,000 to keep DC subways running an extra hour after a severe weather delay.
I'm obsessed with this because it's also like our transit systems are not running late enough for the night economy.
Yeah,
Like, imagine how much more we could sustain as a city if the subway was running after at 1 a.m.
truly. But I just think it's like the first line of the article says Beyonce may not be able to stop the rain, but wait. The rain. Okay. Yeah, Beyonce may not be able to stop the rain, but she can single-handedly keep the subway trains running. And I think it's wild that like one person like one person is like, we're like one person away from our subway lines from like either running or not running. And
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway. But yeah, that just speaks to the power, I guess, of these different creative industries, but also like of the sort of like ecosystem that it takes to support a whole concert or a whole, group of people going to a concert. It's not just that one person coming in, it's like all these different networks that need to be strengthened in order for them to work. So this is a side note or PSA to invest in transit because we need it.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, but like so the city of Toronto in particular, has a lot of different policies and strategies and reports dedicated to strengthening the night and cultural economy as well. There's a Toronto nightlife action plan, which I encourage folks to check it out because I don't know, I just think it's interesting to like we think about the day like we have it's like as if we don't have enough problems to deal with in like the day planning. There's so many problems to deal with as well with the nighttime and how to address it and make it a place that's not only just like I know we're talking about like how to keep it for fun, but it's also like safety, at a certain time of night, like um how do you keep the city running in a way that feels still like welcoming and that people aren't like, kind of running for their lives as soon as the light goes down. Like it's not Gotham City, ideally, although people have compared Toronto in many ways to Gotham City these days. But
Yeah.
other things the city has done to like support this like a subset of the I guess economy is also like they're doing a review or they complete a review of the licensing they've done a licensing and zoning review for restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues, and they're also doing or just completed a study or review of the noise bylaw, so looking at how sound and I guess like how sound interferes with the way our or like our city functions and ultimately what can be done to support the different music venues that are currently around the city, and also like I guess put in also policies in place to protect people from dealing with too much like noise. But funnily enough, going back to the idea of noise and what that means for cities and music venues and all these different things, my day job we did interview the city of Toronto's music like kind of development the development officer ultimately, and we spoke with him about like the noise bylaw review, but also and we also spoke with another with an ethnomusicologist at the University of Toronto about music and sound in the city and what it means for how do we design for these different things, how do we plan for these different things, and what's at stake if we don't ultimately. So I encourage folks to check that out. But otherwise it also introduces this topic of like 24-hour cities and 24-hour economies and the rise of nightmares, which I don't know, Mia, we talked about it briefly, but this is my first time really like diving into the world of nightmares. I don't know how familiar you are with them.
I have never heard of a nightmare before, but I guess, our
Yeah,
mayor can't be awake 24 hours. So
that's true. There's a day shift and a night shift, gotta keep it
kind of like
going.
being the night manager.
Yeah, is that a movie?
I have no idea.
Okay, I think it is. But that's another story. But yeah, so apparently, yeah, there's a whole like system of like nightmares out there. The city of Bogota, Colombia, and New York, and the like City Possible Partnership, they collaborated together and launched a 24-hour cities network. And they actually wrote a report, which actually I'll pull it up so you can take a look at it. But they launched a report looking at the governance, the safety, mobility, and economic development strategies that can be used to keep the nighttime economy alive, but then also to keep citizens safe and ensure that they're like involved in whatever kind of like initiatives are being done. Um, but yeah, it says from one excerpt from the report that I thought was interesting. It says that these new institutions help to consolidate the field known as nighttime policy and planning, which draws from many disciplines such as urban planning, urban design, data sciences, mobility, social sciences, and economic development, just to name a few. So as much as you need a whole army of folks to keep the nighttime economy running, you need a whole army of like professionals and like researchers and whatnot to actually study this and try to make sense of like what can be done or what we should be doing to support our cities. But I think that's a topic for like another episode. So if people are
Yeah.
interested, and if someone happens to be a nightmare and or nighttime planner policy person, please hit us up because we want to chat about it.
Well, I think like this is like so interesting, and I think you like touched on this a little bit, like where you're talking about it's like balancing like safety as well as like encouraging like I don't know, whatever like activities you can do in the night, because I think sometimes like the night economy and even like things like burlesque can get a bad rap, or like they're not necessarily like valued as a part of what makes a city like vibrant and interesting and like a good place to live.
Hmm.
So it's so interesting to hear all this work like highlighting like how much this contributes to our cities.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, it sent me down like a spiral for a while because I was like, there's just so much to talk about, so little time, which I suppose is it's a good problem to have. So it's something we could talk about in other episodes or other movies or other clips that we can find to refer to it. But yeah, like this idea that there's all this work being, all these strategies being done about like how you plan for the day is different than how you plan for the night, and there's so many different things that go into it. To me, I think it's quite fascinating. But it's funny though, because all this talk about um, I guess creativity and how much benefits it brings. The flip side of the story is that ultimately the arts are like very underfunded, are critically underfunded in our cities, and but particularly in Toronto. So going back to that Toronto Arts Council report that I was referring to earlier, it says that despite all the benefits that the arts brings, there's been a disappearance of music venues and performance spaces, not only in Toronto but like in cities around the world. So just touching on like the lack of like funding. So despite all the benefits that arts and culture bring, in 2014, Toronto spent far less per capita on arts, culture, and heritage. So they spent $22.38. So they spent less than Montreal, which spent $55. Vancouver, which spent $47. Calgary spent $42. And Ottawa, believe it or not, spent $28 back in 2009. So we're kind of behind in supporting all the different kind of like creative and arts workers that actually make us that are obviously contribute a huge part to our GDP and are making our cities run. Um, but the thing is, there's been what is called the Reimagining Music Venues report that came out recently. It's part of the School Cities and Wavelength Music. So basically, the report finds that 80% of people that they surveyed agreed that music venues actually bring vitality to their communities, and 80% agree that music venues preserve local culture and memories. And then back to the TAC report, the 63% of Toronto residents say that the city's arts and cultural activities are important to their decision to live in the GTA. So basically what I'm hearing is that without like all these different creative things and fun things to do, there would be people wouldn't want to live here, but we're not supporting it. So they're disappearing. And now we're at a bit of a stalemate, I guess.
Yeah. And I think like as we see in burlesque, like with like, rising property values, it makes these like venues really susceptible to being bought by a developer and then losing them entirely.
Mm-hmm. And just going further into the reimagining music venues like study, it found that 70% of the people who 75% of the people who like responded to their surveys considered local music venues to be endangered or threatened. But not only that, but they're like inaccessible, especially, and unsustainable at the current models where they're at. And so the report was looking across all of Ontario, not just Toronto. And I thought it was interesting that it also proposed a number of different like policy recommendations that like cities in Ontario specifically could implement to try and address this issue, but then also looking at new models of like venues of
Hmm.
music places and cultural infrastructure that might be more sustainable, but then also might help to speak to some of the diversity gaps that came up in the survey. So it said that Ontario venues reflect the creativity of local communities, but their diversity is contested. And there's like a whole other, and it's also a whole other discussion about like what kind of arts and what kinds of culture are valued and are being funded versus others. I had been talking about this with another friend of mine, actually in another upcoming interview on the channel, talking about this deeper, but then also um, uh, I've heard through some like other interviews that we've hosted at the Infrastructure Institute, specifically talking about like Black-led. Oh yeah, we did a whole report. That's where I heard it from. I forgot.
Like, did you write the report?
No, I didn't write the report. That's why.
Okay.
shout out to the team. But at the institute, we did a report talking about how like Black led like cultural infrastructure, so like community centers, cultural like spaces, and a recreational center, all these different things that are like owned by the Black community or led by the Black community are few and far between. And we had done a session where we had interviewed for another event the head of the NIA Center for the Arts based here in Toronto, which is a Black-led art center. And basically, she was saying that the like the public funding for arts, like for a specific type of arts such as like ballet and like I guess like classical music and all these different kind of uh forms of art that kind of fall under that, I guess, what do you call it, that category, get a lot more funding than things like hip hop or, I can't think of another one right now, but maybe like EDM. I don't know, or maybe EDM is one of those ones that people like a lot or fund a lot, but I'm not too sure. But anyway, hip hop was definitely one of the ones that was on the lower end of like the funding radar. And then also from other research, some other articles I read is also like music venue operators are less likely to like kind of like welcome them in or like make space for
Hmm.
them. And that kind of speaks to, I mean, honestly, point blank speaks to like racism first of all, but
Yeah.
also being like, what kind of arts are we like, what kind of value are we attributing to different types of communities, and the different kind of arts that they create. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know if it makes anyone feel better or I guess feel worse, but I would say like Ontario or Canada isn't the only city dealing or aren't the only places that are dealing with this like loss of music venues. It's also happening in the UK, which I guess, yeah, which is not the best of sign, but at least we're in this together at the very least. That's the most comforting thing. And it says, I found an article that says that that it's likely that one music venue per week will be closing in the UK due to a number of different factors, including increased pressure from licensing, financial worries with the increased cost of living and the cost of stock, inflated loan payments, and declining audience members. Which, funnily enough, are like all the issues that Tess was dealing with in her like in her burlesque lounge before Ali, aka Christina Aguilera, came around. The like their audience, their like patronage of the lounge was getting kind of low, and that was mainly because they were lip syncing everything, and so
They
uh
weren't innovating.
yeah, they weren't innovating. And then Ali came with her high powered vocals and took them by storm, and they innovated and they changed things up quite a bit. And although it did help to I guess raise the profile of the club quite a bit, it didn't really, the thing that actually did save them was air rights, but that's another
Yeah.
story.
I mean, I think I know the study you're citing is in the UK, but I think part of that is also like the fact that these music venues don't reflect the diversity of the city. Like
Mm,
when you're not like that diversity also exists in audience members. And so when you're not encouraging, like a diversity of people, like you're missing out on a huge like number of people who are going to be interested in like hip hop and other types of music that's not being promoted by like the old school arts culture, you know?
yeah, that's so true. I think it I had another research I've done just like purely about business, or like an entrepreneurship. And I guess the research finds that like, diversity, as much as like, I know a lot of companies, there's a lot of like, I guess, was it diversity washing? I can't think of the words right now, but
Yeah.
yeah, like, there's a lot of like kind of uh not pointless, but like kind of like meaningless or like EDI initiatives that companies do to try and pretend like they care about it. Like another example would be like greenwashing. They make all these like supposed sustainability targets, but they don't really mean anything or do much. They just kind of look good, and fundamentally they don't really care. Anyway, so there's a lot of companies that do that, and that's to their detriment ultimately, because diversity is just, as much as it's just good for like like a society, but it's also just good business, because when you have like diverse people, you get a diverse set of like you said, like you're drawing in a number of different communities, but you're also getting new ideas that help to like that help to make companies or initiatives more resilient, because they're more adaptable, because you're like exploring things from different facets versus just your same siloed point of view. And so yeah, I think that speaks to that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But I didn't want to end sort of like, it's not all doom and gloom. I think the report that I mentioned before is like a good symbol of that there's research that's being done, like people recognize that there's an issue and that there's work to be done, but then they're also proposing some solutions that can be launched by cities or communities around the world to kind of mitigate from these issues and hopefully turn them around. And I think my favorite part of this particular report is that there's actually a few examples of different models that can be proposed for music venues. And one of the strategies is, it says, is everywhere is a venue. And so it's encouraging the city to leverage DIY or alternative spaces, so like churches, parking lots, beaches, construction sites, and more to host live music. But ultimately, it goes back to what you just said, Mia, about like innovation. So pushing people to be more innovative about like what spaces can be used as cultural spaces, as creative spaces, and how do we like leverage places that might be a bit more underutilized for some sort of social good. And that gets to the another new topic, or a topic that's not necessarily new to me, but like that's on the rise, is the idea of meanwhile spaces and meanwhile use. And so meanwhile use refers to the activation of underutilized space on a temporary basis, often a space that sits empty between tenants for various uses, including pop-up retail and cultural use. And so there's a number of different ways that one of the different ways that the city of Toronto has actually done this is through supporting It's Okay Studios. Have you heard of It's Okay Studios?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it before.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we hosted an event with them back in the summertime, we being like at the Infrastructure Institute, and that was a lot of fun. And I got a chance to actually interview with one of my colleagues. We got to interview the founders of It's Okay Studios, Saeed Yassin and Chris Wilson. But basically, for all those listening, It's Okay Studios is a new independent, Black-led and operated interdisciplinary multi-purpose art space in Toronto's historic Queen West neighborhood. And so basically, the story is that the city had this building, this empty building, which was a former SVP Sports. Shout out to them.
Yeah,
It was
thank
a
you for
form.
my shoes.
Yeah, thank you for my shoes. So many shoes. Thank you. But yeah, it was a former SVP Sports that was sitting empty. Because it was set to be torn down ultimately by the city because they want to turn that site and the ones around it into a park. But instead of letting it just stay vacant while they're waiting for the like demolition date, the city was like, okay, actually, it's okay, can take it over and turn it into a cultural and economic hub until it's time to be taken down. And so, yeah, like it's like from what I understand, it's like there's like an arts gallery. There's a number of like they've it's a place. It's basically an arts incubator ultimately, a place where people can come for like events, for programming, and a number of different things. And I think it's really interesting that the city is willing to work with folks to create something good out of something that was once, temporary. And I think that speaks to some of the innovation that's needed. Um, and then an example of a non-city example would be the space project that's launched by the Why Not Theater. And so it literally asks this simple question, but simple but innovative question in itself is like, what if unused city space was unlocked for people who needed it? And so they've done a lot of research and pilot testing of this model, and they're really advocating for it. And the research shows that 87% of artists have not pursued an artistic project because of a lack of affordable rehearsal space, a lack of affordable space, or a lack of available space, or both. And so they're trying to like kind of mitigate those issues by tapping into these meanwhile spaces and creating, creating hubs for culture to kind of like reign where it initially wasn't. And they've actually also started their own network called the National Meanwhile Space Network. So if you're looking for more information on that, I encourage you to like check it out and see what it's all about.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah. I don't know, for me it's like kind of inspiring. I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of challenges that we're overcoming, but people are doing such great things, and that's ultimately what we're here to talk about them.
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, creative, I don't know, Toronto's creative, society, like it's so creative and I'm like looking forward to seeing. I think people are like a lot more aware or a lot are very aware of like how important these spaces and these activities are to like making this an interesting city. So I hope we win.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And I think we are getting there. I to me the personally I think a telltale sign of it is like we were for all the different kind of themes we touched on, there's like a network somehow to like of like even more folks for people to tap into or collaborate with to like explore these issues further. So it just speaks to the fact that like as I was saying before, like we're not, even though one city has this issue, it's not like they're not the only city. Even though one community has this issue, they're not the only community. And so there's things that can be learned from one another. And people are like reaching out to like kind of develop whatever like best practices or strategies that they can use to help themselves and each other. And I think that just only makes, I don't know, we need it's a collective action for collective liberation. That's what I'm about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, I don't know, is there anything else you want to chat about?
This is like a little bit unrelated,
Mhm.
so we can only cut this out if it's irrelevant. But um, I also you're talking about the Meanwhile spaces. I don't know how long they've been around, but there's also a community cultural spaces trust.
Oh
That's a
yeah.
community land trust that's like focused on preserving like arts, culture, and event spaces. I think like largely around like Bloor and Dufferin.
Yeah.
Um, which I think is so cool. And like I do like some work with community land trust, and so it's interesting to see like how this model that like has gotten a lot of attention for housing can also be used to like preserve, I don't know, hold other sorts of spaces in trust for community use and build vibrant communities. And I think like again, housing like it's such a complicated issue, but like I feel like a lot of this does go back to affordable housing because I think like you need the ability like Christina Aguilera to move to a city with no money and no plan and make it
Yeah. I think
off your
that's,
waitressing job, right?
yeah, not to mention like she got robbed. That was like
Yeah,
another
I
part of it.
forgot she got robbed.
It was so wild because she like didn't have a bank account and she like put her money in the back of the toilet like a bowl the thing, and then yeah, she came home one day and her like place was trash and her money was stolen, and that's
The
also,
toilet lid was off.
yeah, the toilet lid was off. I was like, I can't believe someone actually checked there, but okay.
I know.
uh
When she was hiding it, I was like, oh, she's a genius.
yeah, but apparently I don't know, she like she knew a thing or two, like her and the robber went to the same school or something, I don't know, of Hard Knocks for real.
Um,
But it's funny that you're talking about the land trust because I think, let me just double check. One of the yeah, here, one of the strategies of innovative venue models is literally cultural land
Cultural
trusts.
interest.
Yeah.
Woo!
And I love that. And I like well, I know you work with land trust, so you probably know more than I do, but like I feel like the land trust conversation is like seeping into like, I swear, everything. Like I do research on like businesses and like retail, and even then they're like, okay, let's work on as a strategy, like anti-displacement strategies, like a retail or commercial land trust, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think like Kensington Market, like they do housing, but they're also like Kensington Market is so unique because of its like diversity of like small businesses. And a
Mhm.
lot of their current strategy is focused on acquiring those like retail spaces so that they can protect their vendors as well.
Yeah, and it's like, and I think there's a rise of it, but there's not as many mechanisms as there should be to support these sort of things. Or like I feel like there's more mechanisms to support, uh let's say a residential interest, but then this commercial side is also really important because um like the businesses that are like businesses contribute to the community ultimately where they are. And so by them constantly moving around, it's also hard to create that sort of clientele that helps to build a broader community, you know what I mean, in a little in an ecosystem that makes a place feel alive. So by
Hmm.
not protecting also like the small businesses or the retail um in these areas, we're also missing out on opportunities to strengthen our local economies.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Land trust for everyone is what I'm hearing. Even for music.
Yeah. Everyone needs the land trust.
Okay. I think this was an interesting discussion, and I'm excited for our next movie, which is up for debate if people want to suggest other ones. But I think that's all for today.
Thank you so much to everyone for listening, or anyone who is listening. And let us know, have you watched Burlesque? Are there additional lenses to analyze that maybe we missed out on? What other movies do you think we should review? And let us know, leave a comment in the comment section below. And if you like the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to Untitled Planning for additional content like this and more on all things urbanism.